Paul, thank you so much for joining me. And I thought I'd start with a slightly different question to one that I would normally. And just say, why don't you share with our listener, I like to say our listener, what brought us today together to do a podcast? Do you want to share the background to that?
Yes, absolutely, Maria. And first of all, thanks for having me. Secondly, I hope you have more than one listener. I'm sure you will. Absolutely. Yeah, I suppose it's interesting just that the kind of journeys we're all on, and being able to go from wherever we started in this world. And for me, it was in Ireland. For you, it was Italy, and then being able to do this podcast and have all of those different experiences all come together. So we're able to have this chat. But it's amazing, my experience of growing up in Belfast in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and just how they shape you. And probably at the time I didn't really think they did, but obviously they do have a huge impact, because I don't think you can get away from the fact when you have bombs going off around you every day and tanks driving down your street and soldiers walking past you with guns, that it's not normal as much as we try and normalize it, all the way through to 20 years in a professional footballing career, which is just such an incredible world, but also so unusual in every way. And then also, the fact that you've been in the speaking world for as long as you have, and I've been doing it for over a decade now, and it's just interesting how I've ended up, being on your course and learning so much from you, and very kindly uh, got invited on to do your podcast. So yeah, it's such a roller coaster of a ride to get here.
Yeah, well, you see, Paul, I collect talented people. That's what I do for a living. So when I met you, I knew we were going to have you as a guest. But I want to go back actually. You mentioned the troubles in Belfast and the fact that you're trying to behave like it's normal and it's not normal. Sort of resonates a bit with what we're going through at the moment, where we're living through a pandemic and we're trying to create it as normal. But how did that shape you? Would you say that experience of growing up in that crazy reality?
Yeah, and I do have to use the word normal, because you don't know anything different, and to see the things that were happening every single day, and to just become part of your daily life, that is a very unusual normal, but it's still normal. And it was only whenever I was kind of plucked out of Belfast, and that was simply down to the fact that I could play football well, and sat down in Enfield in North London, and realised that my normal, the first 16 years, wasn't very normal for most people, because when you walk through the leafy suburbs of North London, and realize that it's just a completely different world. And I think the way that it did shape me is it gave me that real resilience that so many people are talking about today, and how do you build that? And I would definitely never suggest for people to go through my experiences growing up, but there are ways that you can build it. And of course, the amount of research that's done on resilience, and all of the sessions and exercises and things that we can do to build our own resilience is all part of the bigger picture. But I suppose my resilience was definitely formed through growing up in that very difficult times.
And where did your talent for football come from? Was it something in the family, or was it because you just played it all the time, or where was that?
Well, I think my mum would say that I got it from her, because she was a fantastic handball player, and then my dad would say that he got it from him because of all his football ability. But it's really difficult to say. I think it was just due going the fact that I was out every single day playing football with my friends in the street. It's what you did before school, during school, after school. Come back to your homework, do it again. So you're doing something all the time, and it probably leads into Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, where, if you want to get to be a master of anything or an expert in any field, there is a theory that suggests that if you do it for 10,000 hours of purposeful practice, then you can eventually get to that goal. Now, I don't know how many hours I played whenever I was growing up, but I suppose over my career, then I probably would have got to somewhere near that, and even more to get to that top level.
Yeah, I suspect you did get to more for sure. But a lot of young boys and young girls, let's be fair, dream of becoming professional footballers or professional sports people. How do you go from being the lad playing, before school, after school, probably all hours on the holidays? How do you go from that to actually being able to play for a team?
Well, the first thing is just doing it a lot, and really enjoying it. And I don't think that I ever realized that I would end up being a professional footballer. It was always a dream that I had, and I would say that it's probably not just my dream growing up around Belfast. I would say there's kids all over England. Then you go outside of the UK and Ireland, you think all over Europe and the world. And the interesting part about this is so many kids want to do this, and not only do they want to be a professional footballer in their country, they want to come and play in the Premier League because it's the the richest and most prestigious league in the world. And that's why whenever I think about it, to do what I was very fortunate to do of playing Premier League and international football, I just realized just how mind blowing the statistics are of that actually happening, because it must be about 100 million to one of the amount of people who were trying to do it and end up doing it. So part of it is just actually the fact that I was playing it every day, I was getting better, but it was must have been some sort of talent in there that I didn't realize I had. It was just part of who I was, and the way my genetic makeup was. Other parts of it was to do with I always wanted to get better. I always wanted to improve. I was always learning, and that's another part of the process. And I suppose for me, the biggest aspect of all of this is the psychology or the mental performance of how do you get over the mistakes and the setbacks and all the difficulties. And that's something that I think, looking back, that I didn't know this when I was a kid growing up, but definitely looking back, that it was probably my mindset and psychology that allowed me to go from that young kid wanting to play professional football until someone who comes out the other side of a professional football career and being able to do the things that I've done.
I think you're right. I think you've got something there. I love the fact that you're always learning, always wanting to get better. The mental performance is so important. So, do you think it is the mental performance that helped you in what you've described, and I used in the introduction, as a competitive and ruthless industry? Do you think that's what it is that allowed you to be successful?
I think just to get in through the door, to walk into a professional football and change room, to walk into a Premier League change room, to walk into an international team, just to get in through the door, you almost have to have certain attributes as an absolute minimum, and they would be the technical aspects. So just being able to be technically good enough to play. Then, of course, you need to have the physical attributes. But once you get to the certain level, and when I would say that certain level, that's the professional level, everybody's technically very, very good, and everybody's kind of the best player at their school coming through their teams all the way to get that level. But then once you get to that level, my question would be, what then separates the best from the best? And that, Maria, that I love the subject of psychology and mental performance, and it's because it benefited me. I know this doesn't work whenever you see in this podcast, but being only 5'6", I was always the smallest player in the team. The fact that other players, I believe, were technically better than me, and yet the question I would have is, well, if I wasn't physically, the best athlete in the room, if I was never technically the best player in the room, how did I go on to have a 20-year career when most players in that team didn't? And I think, looking back on it, it was to do with my mindset, my attitude, my psychology. I suppose it doesn't really matter what you call it. It was always happening in here. And whenever I realized that the more I work on this, I'm going to say this, I mean my mindset and psychology, the better that I became, the more I developed, and the further it took me through my career. So that's only whenever I started to understand that we're not all equal in this, but what can I do that I can control, that I can take advantage of, that probably most other people aren't doing? And that was always around the psychology.
It's fascinating because when I have spoken to the top performers in any sport, it's always been around the mental part. It is really that is so vital. Is that the lesson that you share with businesses? Is that what you're saying to businesses you need to apply and help your people with? Are those the lessons you take from sport?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because that, if you were to take an example like of, I don't know, someone like the Big Four, someone like the KPMG or the PwCs or Deloitte or EY, when you're talking about these big companies, they're getting probably the best technical people to do the job. So when they go into these big accountancy firms, technically they're already equally qualified. So then there's probably the presupposition that everyone should perform to the same level. But of course, we know that doesn't happen. And because there isn't that parity in performance, when you say, well, okay, what else is coming into the equation that allows us to understand what performance looks like, or at least elite performance. And as soon as you start understanding and analyzing that, you go, okay, well, if technically we're all at the same level, because most people have the qualifications, so why aren't they performing to the same level? And then you start adding in the human element, and that's around how the person thinks, their reactions, their responses, their psychology, their attitudes to the job, because obviously not everybody will enjoy the job the same. And that's when you start to take into consideration there are so many facets to performance. And until we start applying some processes to allow people to improve that side of performance, then I think most people aren't going to ever really fully reach their potential.
Fantastic, brilliant. And actually, you answered my next question because I wanted to know what the facets of performance are, and you've listed them for me. That's really great. But the other thing you also advocate is that you should dedicate time to improve your mental performance. Okay, so I want to improve my mental performance. Surely sleep is the best way to dedicate time to do that.
All part of the many things that you need to be an elite performer. And and this is why whenever I was in the sporting world, you could break it down to whenever we're out on the pitch, we're training and we're applying the technical and physical attributes of what we're doing to be the best performer every day. But of course, you then start adding in the psychology, because you can perform as much as you want on the pitch, but as soon as something doesn't go right, it's then to do with your psychology of how you respond to that, or how you react to it. And whenever you start thinking, okay, so if I need to actually work on physically or specifically on my psychology, what is it that I can do? And then you start thinking of things like, okay, what about my language? What is the language that I'm using about myself? Because if I'm using a certain type of language that's not congruent and aligned with my goals, okay, and that's another presupposition. Do you even have goals? Are there specific things that you're working towards? And this is where the business world and the sports world can be so different, because I think people that I played with, that I worked with, they were already the best of the best. Just to get to that level, they are incredibly competitive. They're so focused on winning. They're so determined and motivated just to get to this level. But of course, whenever I compare that to the business world, it doesn't always replicate that same level of performance. And what you think is, does every single person go into the job every day trying to be the best of the best? Well, absolutely. Some will be. Some will try and go in and be driving the performance and driving the business forward. But the way we know about human nature, some people just go in, do the job, do the bare minimum, and then go home. So this is where we need to take into consideration, is it because that person isn't being exposed to what elite performance looks like, or do they simply just not care and they just don't want to do a good job? I would say, on a personal, what my opinion is, I don't think anybody wants to go in and just be mediocre at the job. I think most people are trying to do their best, but they aren't always aware of what they could do to improve their performance. So that would be things like the goal setting, like understanding our language and the impact that it has on us, talking about how we focus and what we focus on every single day, and just the way the brain naturally functions, as well as to do with the accountability and responsibility we take for our actions. So there are just so many areas that we could work on. But of course, when you go into a business, 99% of the business that I've seen and I've worked with, all they ever seem to focus on is the technical aspect of performance. So if it's in sales, what do they need to say? How do they need to close? How do they need to do all the different processes to get someone to make the sale? But of course, that's not taken into consideration of what the person's thinking, feeling, and how they behave on a daily basis.
I love that. That's really good. That was a masterclass in an answer, that was, Paul. Thank you for that. You mentioned goals, and I think that's a really important part of it. And in fact, you talk about having a really clear version of success for you, or clear vision of success for you, I suppose. What if you don't know what that is? Where do you start? What if you're not sure how? Because you might be underestimating what success could be, or totally overestimating it. Does it matter? Is it better to overestimate, to underestimate? How do you fix that version of success?
And again, this is always the challenge with when we're talking about psychology. When you're talking about specific principles, there are so many assumptions we make, and I keep using the word presupposition, and that just presupposing that you even have a version of success. So many people go to work 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and they're working really, really hard, which goes back to my previous answer, that people do work out really hard towards their jobs. but a lot of them don't actually even know what they're working towards. And again, I'm not saying that as some way of judging people. It's more an observation that if you have no idea what you're working towards, then how are you ever going to end up there? So I'll give you an example. Whenever I was 7 or 8 or 9, can't remember what age it was, but I remember my dad turning around to me and saying, because I wrote a book a number of years ago, and he said in the research of that book, he said, Paul, do you know whenever you were a kid, you just remember like looking up at me one day in the house and said, do you know what, Daddy, whenever I'm older, I want to be a professional footballer. And it was almost like he kind of just patted me on the head. It's like, yeah, son, no worries, and carried on with the day. But from an early age, it was what I wanted to do, even though I had no idea what it was. But then suddenly when I got to 16, it became real because I left behind all my family and friends, went to London, and then you become a professional footballer, and then that's not good enough, and you actually want to become a Premier League footballer, and then you want to be an international footballer, then you want to have a long-term career. So the goalposts are constantly moving towards what success is. But of course, that's what I was like as a kid. Now, and I know I look 14, but I'm actually 42. And now, as a 42-year-old guy, my version of success is so different. My actual version of success right now is just about balance, because I've had so many years of my life, 20 to 25 years, where I had no balance in my life. Because to get to that elite level, you can't really have balance and be the best of the best. But of course, because I'm not in that professional footballing world anymore, the success for me is balance, which means still want to do some work stuff, still want to have some family time, still want to have some health and fitness, I still want to explore the world, still want to do some financial work. All of the things that for me, I've decided are going to create that balance. And the one thing I would suggest to most people, okay, might necessarily exactly know what it is you're working towards, but if you sat down and just simply worked out what you really do want to have in your life, and of course then start working out what you do want to have in your life, that will start creating this process of creating what this clarity is of success for you.
And I think actually this time of we're recording while we're still going through a pandemic. I suspect when the podcast comes out, we will still be going through a pandemic. But anyway, it's a good time to stop and reflect what you want and what you don't want. And it's lovely that I'm a big fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That you are 42 and your meaning for life is balance. I like that. I think that's great. And of course, balancing footballs as well. I like that. I like that. So here's a personal question from me because I know it's something you talk about, but you say that our response is within our control, our emotional response. So I have a problem with that. I'm a highly emotional, hormonal Italian female. If something happens, I am going to react before I even think. I have no ability to control my response. Could you help me, please?
Well, listen, Maria, I'm not telling people that they should react in a certain way. All I would suggest is that the science tells us that because of the way our brains have formed over the years, very much we used to just react to things. A situation would happen and we just reacted, almost like the way animals do. But of course, the way that we've evolved over the thousands and thousands of years as humans, we have this, this part of the front of our brain that just gives us a much more rational, logical, reasonable way to respond to situations. And of course, that then gives us the option. And then it always comes back to the choice. If something happens, do I have to respond to this way? Well, yes, you could do, because like you just said, habitually, you've done this over and over and over. But actually, do I have a choice in how I respond? Yeah, I do actually. I'll give an example. And this is a terrible example, but I hope it gives you the point of what I mean. I remember playing in a football match, and I won't tell you who it was, I won't tell you the game just because it's not appropriate, but the essence of the story still remains the same. And I went in for a challenge with a footballer, and we're in the middle of the pitch, right in the centre circle, referee's about 5 yards away from us. I went in, did a 50-50 with this guy, smashed each other. We both fell on the floor. As the ball skewed off to the side, the referee kind of turned away and started running wherever the ball was going. Me and the player got up and almost squared up to each other. And then he spat in my face. Now, that is absolutely horrific. In any other place and time, part of the world, any other scenario, you can only imagine what my automatic reaction would have been. And that reaction probably would have been some sort of punch or violence or some way of responding just because of that kind of, that instinct kicks in. Because I'm standing in the middle of a football pitch with 30,000 people watching, and because he did that to me, my instinct was to go for him. My response was, if I punch this guy in the face, I'm going to get sent off. And because I'd been trained and had learned that response over and over, not to how to deal with when someone spits on you, but how to keep your emotions in check so that you have your eye on the bigger picture. And that for me is a terrible example, but it's a really good way of me describing that we always have a choice in how we respond to any situation we find ourselves in.
Actually, I don't think it is a terrible example. I think it's a really good example. What did you do?
I obviously waited about 20 minutes and then went in for a 50-50 tackle with him and went slightly over the top. So he did get through him back. But
Fantastic.
it's just about, what they say is about revenge is a dish best served cold. So, but the whole point is it's always about, I could have easily reacted in one way and I chose to respond in another way because it was not just with me, it was about my teammates, about my team winning the game, and also thinking about the bigger picture. And of course, if I had to get sent off for punching him, I would have got fined, would have got missed the next 3 games. So all of those flies through my mind in a split second.
Excellent. So it's the bigger picture. Think of the big. Okay, I shall try to do that. So listen, you've teamed up with Leon Lloyd, former England rugby player. What are you two up to together? Because obviously you're not playing football or rugby together, surely. What are you doing?
Definitely not. And the fact that I'm 5'6" and he's 6'4", I'm really glad that we're not actually doing anything physical together because he'd run over the top of me. Yeah, it's really interesting because we've had such similar lives. He's had nearly 20 years as a professional rugby player for Leicester Tigers in England. I had 20 years in football. And then for the last 10 years or so, we've both been speaking to businesses around the world and sharing our experience. And when we met each other a few years ago, we've had such parallel lives that we now feel like we're in a position to be able to share what we do and how we do it with other people, whether they're from a sporting background, a business background, military background, that they can share their story with companies and organizations around the world, very similar to what we're doing. So we've just had a course just last month, which again, just as we know in this really difficult climate, shows that courses and programs can start going ahead because we had everybody together for a week's residential at the start of our 12-month program. And it's just allowing these people who have already had, really successful careers. And, one of the guys from the business world took his company from 5 million up to 100 million. We've had a TV presenter, we've had Champions League winners. We even had a guy from the Red Arrows, and all these really successful people who now want to share their story. We've brought them on our program, and then they're able to go out and share their story, similar to what Leon and myself have been doing for a long time in their own lives and their careers, and really just helps them probably maximize their earning potential as well.
Fantastic, brilliant. And as I said to you outside of this, I'm happy to support you guys to do that, which
Yeah.
is what it's wonderful to be bringing these great stories and this great experience. So finally, because we rapidly run out of time, I could talk to you all day. If there was one thing in your experience that you've seen going around traveling, seeing performers, good performers and elite performers, what is the one thing that makes the difference?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. Such a difficult question because we know it's never that simple. But if I were to just try and think about in my life and understanding how what I've done can compare it to what other people as the top performers have worked with, I would say they're very, very, very clear about what they want to achieve. And when I say clear, they have an absolute precision of exactly what it is. So I have that understanding that people who want to do something, if they have enough motivation, they will 100% make it happen, as opposed to the people who would really like to do something, but then an obstacle gets in their way, and then that's that dream or goal thrown out the window just because they don't have the drive and dedication to be able to overcome these inevitable objects along the way.
I like that. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Paul.
Absolute pleasure, Maria. Thanks for having us.